So this is part 2 of the lecture where we start talking about Paleolithic cave painting. And part 1, we talked about the introduction to some of the main themes in the chapter in the text as well as the lecture. Just review those real quick. They were at the beginning of the last lecture. So we'll be looking at some of the same things here. The materials and techniques of the cave painting. We'll talk about how humans were depicted. There's not a lot of it. And then animals are the main sort of depictions. And then if you keep watching part 3, this will connect in Neolithic and Paleolithic being talked about in the different ways, the ways that they're different and similar. So this definitely will talk about and explore the origins of creative representation and some of the stylistic developments of these time periods. And this is really still early on the origins of art for humanity. So it's pretty interesting stuff. This whole section is about cave painting. And a lot of the sites we look at are, 2 of the sites are in the Pyrenees Mountains, which are between Spain and France, the southern part of France. And then another one is over here in this region of France, so not too far from the Pyrenees Mountains. This cave that we'll be looking at first here is called Chauvet Cave, and it's close by this natural formation that would have been visible way back into Paleolithic times called the Pont d'Arc, which is a pretty amazing natural feature and may be part of why this area was important to them. They're not sure, but this is a thought that a lot of people have. This cave was probably well preserved because it was made out of limestone cave walls, like a lot of these type of caves in the north of Spain and south of France had limestone caverns, and they were often sealed for a really long period of time. This one, they think, was sealed by a rock slide, and that's part of why it lasted so well, was preserved so well. It's called Chauvet Cave, named after the discoverer, Jean-Marie Chauvet. In 1994, it was discovered, so a fairly recent discovery compared to some of the other caves and objects we've looked at. And that makes it interesting because it wasn't necessarily messed with as much. Not that the other ones are badly preserved, but it just makes it more obvious that it wasn't messed with because of, the recent discovery and the way archaeology has developed in modern times and the way that they deal with things. There's conjecture that because the paintings are deep in caves and hard to reach, that it wasn't an area that they were living in. They weren't inhabited caves, that they weren't living at the mouth of the cave or something like that. And also because of where it's at, how hard it is to get up there. So people have talked a lot about, and I wish we could show you this documentary about it that I talked to at the end of this part of the slideshow where they went in and filmed it. They actually have this really well sealed off. The French government doesn't let very many people in here, and there's like a walkway throughout the whole cave, and it's like sealed to keep the temperature and everything just right so the paintings don't get destroyed because they're pretty fragile. There's over 300 wall paintings and engravings. There's a bear skeleton set on a rock, purposely the skull of it. And then there's other types of animal skeletons in there and a lot of like these beautiful stalactites and mites throughout the whole thing. Most of the pigments are black outlines or maybe some red as well from time to time. There's a lot of mammoths, horses, and some large like felines and rhinos, and got some handprints. There's just a huge predominance of animals, and it reflects maybe some different ideas that we'll talk about with hunting magic, to somehow harm or capture the image of an animal, kill the animal, or capture the animal is the idea. And again, because of the depth back into this whole region, there's ideas that maybe this is kind of initiations or rituals about hunting, or fertility, and then some idea maybe of seasons changing and being recorded. So, like the last lecture, where we're talking about the lack of writing in this prehistorical era, that it's really hard to know exactly what they were using these for. This is a pretty interesting part of the cave, because if you think back to this time period, what would they be using to go into the cave for light? Is really basic sort of lanterns made of stone, maybe, or sort of torches. And if you moved it across the surface, there would be almost a kind of proto-cinematic feeling about how things were moving throughout the space. So that's pretty interesting. And they created pictures on different surfaces. It's not like the whole cave was flat, and so they'd often ingeniously try to use the shape of the walls in the way that they depicted the animals. So that's pretty cool too. These ones in this part have almost a sort of cartoon movement to the legs if you move a light across it. This next panel that we'll talk about is sometimes called panel of horses because of the 4 horses right there. But this is it in its entirety. There's the 4 horses. It's got on it these ancient oxen that are now extinct aurochs. There's the horses, rhinoceroses, and a couple other different small markings throughout. There's another rhinoceros here and there. It's a really pretty naturalistic depictions of animals. We'll look at another cave later called Last Cow Cave, and there's been like debate about the age of these cave paintings versus that one, because there used to be theories that naturalism was a later dated sophistication because of the sophistication, but some of the carbon dating on these have put them as earlier than that, so that's been kind of an argument point for quite a while. So there's a long circa here of when they could have been made, because of that sort of debate. I like to point out to you how there's this use of outline, see, and then other parts they use tones that they build up in the pieces. So even the ones they build up, there's sort of a feeling of an outline, and then they're building it up with tone. So that's like almost like modern day charcoal drawings, really, in a lot of ways. If you took a drawing class, you would be doing things similar to this by building up tone, but you would probably be using it more to depict the light source, like if light was coming from here where the shadow would be, and they're not doing it for that reason. They're doing it to kind of describe the local color, the color of the animals, right? Or to bring attention to certain parts of the creatures. This section down here, where the rhinos are attacking each other, is thought to be possibly one of the first narratives in art, because they look to be made at the same time, and this would be a narrative because there's 2 rhinos interacting in a particular way, whereas in other parts of this cave and other caves we look at, they're just layered on top of each other, possibly made by different artists at different times. There's not necessarily a story or narrative coming out of this. So this would be, in 2D or 3D, the first time we get some idea of human narrative is 2 rhinoceroses attacking each other. Pretty amazing. Throughout the cave, the most common are mammoths, horses, but also, like I said, there are quite a few rhinoceroses as well, but these aren't as common as the mammoths and the horses. This is a picture of that bear skeleton I was telling you about, or the skull of the bear set on a rock purposefully. So, there's a lot of things about animal bones. Animals, was it put here with the head, with the flesh still on it? We don't know, really mysterious as to why they did these. But people do have a lot of theories about shamans and rituals and capturing animals. And then there's been the idea of hunting them. But people have disputed that because a lot of the type of animals depicted they didn't necessarily eat as their food sources. So people say, but based on some other type of records they found, fossilized things. So it's hard to say. Most of the pigments they used were charcoal ochres that were either red or yellow, and they would have used flat rocks as their palettes, and then brushes made out of either like reeds, twigs, or maybe bristles made out of animal fur in some way. There's evidence of like scaffolding in some places where they could get up higher to do their paintings in some caves, so that's part of their sophistication to bring tools in like that with them. And then throughout this cave, there's also a bunch of these dots and handprints, which are pretty interesting. And they do them in different ways. One is like there's a hand here and they diffuse pigment around it like a halo is the main way. That's a close-up of their and they think that they probably, and some of the dots too, would have made this way where they blow through a bone tube of some sort the pigment onto the wet wall, and it sticks and creates those. It's pretty amazing because throughout the cave in Chauvet Cave, there's some people who they can tell it's a particular individual that put their handprint in different parts of the cave this way because of the shape of the fingers. So in some way, this is almost like a portrait of a person from thousands and thousands of years ago. Did they mean it to be a portrait? I don't mean that they meant it to be. I don't think so. But in some way, it's sort of like a I was here type of thing. Why did they do it? We don't exactly know, but that's one of the main sort of ideas. It wouldn't necessarily be a signature, but some people have said that. So a lot of guesswork really because of the lack of writing. But this sort of shows you the age of it because you have that concretion from mineral deposits over a really long period of time right next to / almost on top of that handprint. And so this is just a small illustration of that would be the bone tube, and they'd be spraying it around and doing some of the dots that way as well. It's pretty cool. Really pretty interesting to just think about for a moment. Somebody from thousands and thousands of years ago walking through this area where there's this natural formation up like a cliff into the dark with just like really basic sort of light sources, and they have maybe stone palette with them, some pigments, a bone tube. They're together as a group maybe to do a ritual, and they light up their lanterns and maybe erect a scaffolding, and they start to paint these images in the torchlight, and there's a feeling of movement for them, and maybe they have some sort of dancing and music. They found musical instruments in some caves, ancient ones, and maybe there's like a narrative for them about it. They're practicing hunting skill or hunting magic to capture or kill animals. And it's pretty interesting to think about, really. So two other caves we're going to look at are in the Pyrenees Mountains, which are between Spain and France. They're on the southern part of France here. And there's the Lascaux Cave, and then we're going to look at another cave there. But first, that's the one we're going to look at, the Lascaux Cave. This is kind of a view of what that area might look like nowadays. And this is like limestone rock formations. Obviously, these are modern houses. Let's look at this cave, Lascaux. So it was discovered in 1940, so a while ago compared to the recent 1994 one. There's sort of sometime debate about, maybe these are fake cave paintings, But the evidence for them not being fake is that they're located really deeply in the cave, and there were musical instruments near the paintings that were from ancient times, and even fossilized footprints and handprints. So this is thought to be 1,500 years later than Chauvet Cave. But like I said a bit ago when I was talking about Chauvet, there's some amount of argument between people about the carbon dating and accuracy there. we think again for this cave that the function of it was shamanistic rituals, like this hunting magic I'm talking about. Again, argued by different people, different books I've read say different things. But in this one, there's more belief on it because of there's some images with like half bird, half lion type of images. And shamanism is the idea of a spirit realm and there being good and bad spirits, and there's these intermediaries like a priest, shaman between the worlds, and they have to form like do certain type of rituals, and it kind of gets into the ideas of ancestor cults. As part of that, like I said, there's the idea of hunting magic to control animals, maybe to keep them from being from dying out as a food source. So it could be about killing them or maybe keeping them safe. And then some people have said it's instructional for hunting and capturing them. It's not clear fully because they wouldn't have eaten all the type of animals that are depicted. But in this cave, there's also a human stick figure that we'll look at. And they use a lot of the same type of minerals. There's that yellow ochres, red ochres. There's some brown ones. And they're pretty sure that they would mix them up with like animal fat, or maybe some kind of plant mixtures and then apply them with the same type of brushes. And then the charcoal is probably burnt sticks, basically. There's a lot of illusion in this hall of running bowls of kind of motion, and these are high up on the wall towards the ceiling. And so this is the main chamber of the cave. This kind of shows you the scale compared to people inside the room, inside the main chamber, called a gallery sometimes in certain types of documentaries. And so there's bulls and horses as the main depiction, and they're running, appear to sort of be almost like running, going uphill at a diagonal. This is, kind of like I talked about with the reindeer horn, sort of using the space, and I talked about in Chauvet Cave, using the space and they're thinking about the kind of formations and things when they're doing it. I think I want to make sure you know right away that these wouldn't have been done all at one time. I think I said that also about Chauvet Cave, been added to at different times. So we can't think of this as a herd that one artist created, or that it's necessarily a herd that they're trying to create, but more that they may have just applied things over and top of each other and by each other for different reasons. There is here in this bowl that we'll look at, it's a good example, some sort of conventions of animal depiction, sometimes also called stylistic conventions, a regular way of doing it, that we'll see for thousands of years, and we saw it in parts of the last cave as well, where they like to show all four limbs and even kind of twist slightly the head and the horns to show us the whole animal. The front of it's a bit twisted. That's called a composite view. We'll see this in the next chapter with the way that people are depicted by other artists in the Near East. So this is to get the idea of the whole essence of the animal they're trying to show us. They think that, like I said, this was created over a course of generations, or at least different times. So pretty amazing, the detail on some of these, and you even get like small, this is a close-up, some of these things have really small textural type of details. This bowl is more of an outline in charcoal, but there's like a careful handling of material. There's like small little detailed reindeers. This is pretty sublime to me, the little details in the horns and the way in which they've kind of tried to capture the form of the reindeer with line work and pigment into bigger blocks. So I think these are very, very beautiful, very, very beautiful, and have like almost a modern sensibility to them. Like people try to capture this type of thing in modern art almost. Like Picasso, and people were interested in looking at older art. The next piece was in a different cave, part of the cave, I should say, a different chamber. It's part of Lascaux Cave, but a different chamber. Its name is Chinese horse, but that is sort of like the Venus pieces we looked at, how they're named because of somebody just decided to call it that, and the name stuck. Well, this is the same type of idea. Not because it's actually connected to China, but because it has an aesthetic quality that has a really superficial resemblance to some types of older Chinese art. It's not a historic, like, factual connection. So this is an interesting piece to me because it has this beautiful outline, and then there's a pigment applied to give some feeling of the form of the horse. And then this part of the horse is left with the stone wall. And it's thought to be a pregnant horse, and that the fact that they left this part without pigment gives a focal point to it to show it that it's a pregnant horse. And this gives us some of the ideas that we talked about with fertility and the hunt's importance in society. So this could be part of that. There's thought to be maybe arrows also coming towards it, so it could be that, or maybe some type of a trap. People have said different things, but I'm kind of leaning overall towards the fertility aspect of this piece when I look at it and read about it and think about it. This is a detail of this axle gallery of the same cave. So there's other types of pieces in this part of the cave as well. To me, almost sometimes these almost look like wheat things too, but that's not what they're thinking they are. It's to do with like the trap or the arrows. That's what they're referring to in your book when they talk about that. A piece in this cave that's really interesting to me has two different names. Some people call it Rhinoceros, Wounded Man, and Disemboweled Bison. That's what your book calls it, figure 110. It's also known as Wounded Man and Bison. This is one of the earliest depictions of a man versus a female in Paleolithic or art in general, from probably about somewhere, I just say 1500 BC because it's in between the two. It's definitely man because there's a penis that's been put onto the figure, but it's not realistic at all. He's almost more like a symbol. And this over here is a bison that's been disemboweled, and this is said to be a rhinoceros. You can see sort of, forgive the pixelation on the slide, this is the bowels of the bison coming out right there. And this shows you the man with some kind of spear that has a duck head on it. And so this is an interesting piece because there's been said that the man has a bird-faced mask on him possibly, and he's only got 4 fingers. So he's definitely not as realistically treated as the animals. And he's more like a symbol because of that. Is he wounded? Is he dead? Does his staff with a duck head or spear belong to him? These are all the questions. Did the rhino over here wound the man, if he is even wounded? Or did the bison wound him and then he disemboweled him? So it's not even sure if they're placed together exactly purposely. It would be a complex narrative if they were. But there's a lot of questions about them. And I think where it's at in the cave is in a well, so it's kind of not in a as easily or accessible area. So that's also kind of interesting part of it. It seems to me that there's some intentionality between the placement of at least these two characters. This one almost feels like it's going off. And so that it has another name as Wounded Man and Bison sometimes makes more sense to me, or Wounded Man, Disemboweled Bison, rather than the rhinoceros necessarily being part of it. But it's really, like we said, hard to tell because of the lack of writing. It's a pretty interesting piece, though, just because it's one of a man's or woman's earliest depiction of a man. So that in and of itself is very interesting. Your book doesn't show this piece, Great Black Bull, but I like to show it because I like to show you how careful they do in their handling of pigments, red and black pigments, and doing things like keeping part of the negative space of the cave wall and adding positive shape to create the feeling of the bull. So really interesting sort of gestalt theory kind of going on here in their understanding of creating art. And then this piece just kind of shows you can actually go in and view this cave and kind of shows you where some of the paintings are at in situ that the pictures don't necessarily always show you. You see this, you don't know how it would look, but this is kind of the feeling of the cave if you're going through it. Again, like I said, older slides, some of my mentors have given me some that helped me have some of their slides, but this kind of shows you at least a feeling of that. The last cave we're going to talk about is also from the Pyrenees region, and it's Nio Cave, or Grotto de Nio Cave. That means grotto means cave. This is the entrance to it here. It's in the northern part of the foothills of the French Pyrenees Mountains, and it lies in a steep-sided valley opposite other smaller caves above a river basin. And it has a main gallery that extends more than 2,000 meters, so it's really large. It's kind of called a salon noir, like a famous cathedral, like full of black outlined animal paintings and some rock engravings of fish. So it's really, really beautiful. This kind of shows you the quality of the cave paintings that are black outlined, almost more like drawings, but they're called cave paintings. It's very unique. It has a series of prehistoric footprints in it and a very rare charcoal sketch of a weasel also. It's been radiocarbon dated to about Paleolithic between 12,000 and 10,000 BCE. And you can kind of see in some of them that there's the age right here where the stalactites have been growing over them. Your book doesn't talk to you much about this one, but I show it because I think it's like a really sublime cave because of all the long, huge chamber and all the detailed black outline drawings. It has like a common theme feeling to it. But this is some of the similar stuff we've been talking about already. Just want to show you that there's many other caves besides the few that your book focuses upon. So you need to be reading this whole section about cave painting and keeping up with the book as you're watching the lectures. This is a documentary I recommend. It's about Chauvet Cave. It's really, really beautiful by Werner Herzog. It's something I would show to you if we were in class, but I can never find a way for you all to be able to access it. I believe it's on Amazon Prime if you have that. It used to be on Netflix. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long, and it's got a lot of beautiful cinematography of the cave and talks to you about what they're kind of doing and studying and the development of it over a long period of time. So that takes us through the Paleolithic era and through our second part of the lecture. So this is the end of part 2. The next lecture is going to be talking about the transition from Paleolithic, quickly Mesolithic, and then Neolithic art. So I'll see you next time.